Thanks so much, Alana, and thanks for joining us today. Today, I'm here with a healthcare worker, Michael Gerlin. He's an ICU nurse from Edmonton, and I want to be clear about who New Democrats are standing with. In this time of crisis in our country, New Democrats are standing with healthcare workers like Michael. Michael and healthcare workers like him, nurses like him, and other frontline workers like him have been putting their lives at risk to keep us safe. They've been working so hard, putting so much burden on themselves, killing themselves, working so hard to save our lives. And at the minimum, we can make sure that they get the support they need, that they are free and free from fear to do their work, and that they're supported. They need resources. They're understaffed and overworked and under-resourced. And it's our responsibility to make sure they have the resources they need. And looking around the country at this moment, the crisis that we're in right now, we see the Prime Minister talking about bringing in a national emergency declaration in terms of having the Emergencies Act put in place. That is an example of the failure of his leadership, the fact that it's taken so many weeks to do something, weeks and weeks. The occupation, the convoy has laid siege to Ottawa, has blocked barriers, has intimidated healthcare workers, harassed and intimidated people in their communities. And so I want to send a really clear message. We stand with healthcare workers. We stand with nurses. We stand with the truckers that have done their job throughout the pandemic to keep us fed and make sure that we have the goods that we need. We stand with workers that have been continuing to work through this pandemic. These are the people we stand with. And when I see premiers caving to the demands of angry mobs, I believe that is an act of cowardice. Leadership means taking the right decision that is in the interest of people, not caving to the demands of angry mobs. We know absolutely there will be a time that we will move past restrictions. That's obvious. We have to do that. But that is a decision that should be done with public health officials or public health experts giving us the advice, not angry mobs. And it should be done understanding the plight of our healthcare system. We know what happened in Alberta when healthcare measures were lifted too soon, and our healthcare system was almost overwhelmed. We heard horrible stories about the crisis in healthcare. And Michael will share some of the struggles that he experienced personally as an ICU nurse in Edmonton. We know that there is a cost to making decisions that are not in the interest of people. And we also know there's a cost to inaction. We've seen in this country our borders that have been shut down. We've seen our capital city laid to siege. And now we're seeing people around the world looking at Canada saying, well, this is a country that can't control its borders, can't control its capital city. It hurts our country. And the fact that politicians are politicizing healthcare measures undermines public trust. People want to know they can trust the decisions that are being made because they're in the best interest of them and their families, that they're in the best interest of keeping our healthcare system going, not because they're caving to the whims of people that are just yelling out and being angry. And we know that in Ontario, for example, Doug Ford is more interested in his election prospects in June than making decisions that are in the best interest of people. And so, this is a time for us to show solidarity and stand with the Canadians that have done so much to keep us safe and healthy. This is a time to show that we are committed to our healthcare system, to make sure it's properly funded. This is a time the Canadians who are frustrated, having done everything right, want to hear a plan for us to get past the pandemic, and we need that plan. So we're pushing the Prime Minister to work with provinces and territories to deliver that plan. What is that plan? What does it look like? And how can we get past this? But we cannot make decisions that put people at risk, that put our healthcare workers at risk, and put our healthcare system at risk. And that's why we want to make it really clear who we stand with. So with that, je vais mentionner encore, nous sommes en solidarité avec nos travailleurs de première ligne, nos travailleurs de santé. Et on pense que dans une situation de crise, on doit s'assurer qu'on fait les décisions nécessaires pour protéger la population, protéger les gens. Ça veut dire avoir des mesures sanitaires qui s'assurent qu'on peut on peut sortir de la pandémie. Et je veux clairement dire que les néo-démocrates, nous sommes du bord des travailleurs de première ligne comme Michael. Nous sommes du bord de travailleurs de santé, de camionneurs qui ont fait leur travail depuis toute la pandémie. On est du bord des gens qui ont suivi les conseils de santé publique. On est de leur bord. Et le fait qu'on a des premiers ministres des provinces qui prennent des décisions pour répondre aux gens qui intimident la population, qui harcèlent les gens, qui sont des gens qui créent un siège dans la capitale, qui ont des blocages sur les frontières. Ce n'est pas la bonne chose à faire d'écouter ces gens au lieu de rester en solidarité avec les gens comme Michael, avec nos travailleurs de première ligne, avec nos infirmières. Et on veut montrer que c'est ces gens, les Canadiens qui ont suivi les santé publiques, les gens qui ont sacrifié beaucoup, on est de leur bord. Et à ce moment, je veux mentionner encore que le gouvernement libéral et les conservateurs ont essayé de jouer des politiques avec des questions de santé. Et le résultat, c'est une érosion de confiance dans nos institutions. Et on doit toujours prendre des décisions basées sur la preuve, sur les experts, au lieu de baser nos décisions sur les demandes des gens qui sont fâchés et qui sont dans une occupation de la capitale. Donc, ce qu'on veut voir, on veut voir du leadership, on veut voir un engagement d'investir dans nos soins de santé, d'aider les gens comme Michael, les infirmières, les travailleurs de première ligne, les travailleurs de santé, et de donner un plan pour comment on va sortir de la pandémie. Avec ça, I'm going to pass it over to Michael and hear from Michael. Michael, your story, because your story represents the struggles of so many healthcare workers. And I just want you to talk about what it's been like for you in this pandemic as an ICU nurse in Edmonton, and just talk a little bit about your experience. Michael.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here to speak about my fellow colleagues and my experiences working this pandemic. And as Mr. Singh said, my name is Michael Garland, and I'm a registered nurse working in an intensive care unit in Edmonton, Alberta. I currently work in one of the busiest hospitals in Western Canada. I've spent over 7 years of my career working in intensive care, and I can speak from experience that this nursing shortage has been a crisis that existed well before the pandemic started. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated this crisis in ways we never would have imagined. Not only do we have not enough nurses to currently meet the demands of our decimated healthcare system, but many of my colleagues are also leaving in droves to escape a workplace that constantly reminds them of the horrors and trauma they've suffered through working on the front lines of this pandemic. A short time ago, the medical community of physicians and nurses, respiratory therapists and pharmacists alike, we're all heralded as heroes, we were respected, but that's not the case anymore. Throughout this pandemic, we've suffered and continue to suffer from the prejudice and animosity from the small but loud group of anti-vaxxers and people who are against evidence-based medicine. Ironically, these are the very people we struggle to look after. There have been obscene amounts of COVID-19 hospitalizations, with the majority of them still unvaccinated, and it's increasingly difficult to meet these demands with our current nursing shortage. My colleagues and I have worked tirelessly long hours while working 2 to 3 times the amount that we normally would on a daily basis because of the sheer amount of patients that we're seeing. Human resources are a finite resource, and we simply do not have enough nurses to meet the demands of our healthcare system. On top of that, the sheer amount of psychological and physical trauma that my colleagues and I have suffered is unprecedented. This has forced many of my colleagues to leave for other provinces offering thousands of dollars of incentive bonuses, a better political atmosphere, a better quality of life, and some have even gone south of the border to take advantage of better opportunities. These are highly experienced, highly trained registered nurses that are leaving our profession. It's one thing to replace a registered nurse, but it's another to replace their experience and expertise that they take with them, something that they've honed for years and decades. Not only do we struggle to adequately staff our front lines to safely look after patients, but we struggle to retain the nurses who are wanting to or are still trying to work. I've had colleagues lay in bed for several hours on their days off because the pandemic has demanded so much of them that it's a struggle to even muster the energy to get something to eat. I've had colleagues who have tried to seek out help, but their WCB claims have been denied and continue to suffer through their PTSD. It's not normal to see the sheer amount of suffering, the sheer amount of death, And it's not normal to receive the sheer amount of animosity on a daily basis when we're trying to simply do our job. It's easy to say, let's hire more nurses, and that's absolutely so important. But first and foremost, we still need to find creative ways to help and support the current nurses, the current workforce who are struggling to stay afloat. We need to look at creating and regulating safe nurse-to-patient care ratios backed by evidence-based research, something that's already been done for decades. Lastly, we need federal and provincial support for medical leave of absences due to trauma, abuse, PTSD, and suffering that we have received and continue to receive from working on the front lines of this pandemic. My colleagues and I are empty shelves of what we used to be. We need help now so we can continue to do what no one else can. Help us so that we can help those who need us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I could hear the pain in your voice, describing the struggles of your colleagues. I want you to know, Michael, you're not alone. There's so many people that are going through this, and it should not be this way. You just heard from a frontline healthcare worker, ICU nurse, who has, throughout this pandemic, put his life on the line to save the lives of others. And he is feeling what his colleagues are feeling, the trauma of being attacked, of being singled out, and by a very loud but minority group of folks. And I want to also send a message of unity in Canada. The vast majority of Canadians stand with people like Michael, stand with our healthcare workers. And we need to make that clear, that Canadians believe in standing with healthcare, believe in our healthcare system, want it to remain public, and want our nurses and our healthcare workers to be properly funded, supported, and to be able to do their jobs. That's what the majority of Canadians want. And the majority of Canadians respect and admire and appreciate nurses and appreciate healthcare workers. And so we can't let the voices of a small group of people intimidate, threaten, assault, and harm the very people that have kept us safe through this pandemic. So let's be clear who we're standing with. We're standing with healthcare workers. We're standing with workers. We're standing with Canadians who have done their part. And it is our job to make sure that they are not suffering alone, that they are getting support, that they are being supported, and that we're standing with them. And we can't allow decisions to be made because there's an angry mob at the front door, especially when this angry mob is not based on any evidence, based on any science, that they are screaming at the door without any sort of basis for it. And when we know there are Canadians out there that have done everything right and are frustrated, they are upset and frustrated. And so we owe it to those Canadians that have done everything, that have followed through on healthcare measures, that have gotten vaccinated, to have a plan of how we'll move forward to protect our healthcare system, to properly fund it, so we're never in a position where people like Michael are having to leave, colleagues of Michael's have to leave the profession that they love because they're burnt out. They have to leave the profession they love because they can't handle the trauma anymore. It should not have gotten to this point. I'm really sorry it has, Michael. And I'm committing to you and to all healthcare workers out there that you can trust New Democrats to fight for you, to fight for our healthcare system, and to make sure that people are standing in solidarity with you and your colleagues and people like you who have done so much for us. With that, I'll pass it back to Alana to moderate the questions for the folks that are attending now.
Thank you, Jagmeet. We'll take one question and one follow-up question, please. I just ask that you use the raise hand function to identify yourself. On va prendre des questions. Une question et une question de suivi. Utilisez la fonction lever la main, s'il vous plaît. So the first question that we have is from Ray Fillion from TVA. Go ahead, Ray.
Oui, bonjour, M. Singh. Merci de prendre nos questions. J'aimerais savoir si vous êtes d'accord ou non que le fédéral ait recours à la loi sur les mesures d'urgence pour gérer les manifestations contre les mesures sanitaires. Est-ce que, selon vous, ce serait la bonne chose à faire à ce moment-ci ou non?
Je vais appuyer cette décision, notre équipe va appuyer cette décision dans le Parlement. Mais je veux aussi mentionner que c'est preuve, ça fait preuve, ça montre la faillite du Premier ministre. Parce qu'on est dans cette position qu'on a besoin d'utiliser les mesures d'urgence, les lois sur les mesures d'urgence, à cause d'une manque de leadership depuis des semaines. depuis des semaines, le gouvernement fédéral, le Premier ministre a laissé le convoi de s'installer à la capitale, de bloquer les frontières. Et à cause de ça, on est maintenant dans cette crise. Donc, c'est vraiment un exemple de ces preuves de la faillite de ce gouvernement. Mais on doit utiliser tous les outils nécessaires pour régler cette crise et on va appuyer, s'il y a un vote dans le Parlement, on va appuyer. Mais encore, on dit qu'on a besoin de leadership. Où était le Premier ministre depuis des semaines? Pourquoi il a seulement décidé d'agir maintenant au lieu d'agir il y a des semaines?
Est-ce que vous avez été consulté par le gouvernement sur le possible recours à cette loi sur les mesures d'urgence?
Pas spécifiquement. On a eu une conversation qu'il y a des planifications pour comment on peut régler cette crise, mais pas spécifiquement cette utilisation de cette loi. Mais encore, je dis que c'était après notre demande pour un débat d'urgence dans le Parlement que le Premier ministre a vraiment commencé de faire quelque chose. Et on a dit à ce moment que c'était, quand on a lancé cette demande pour le débat d'urgence, c'était 12 journées de la siège. C'était après les frontières étaient déjà bloquées et on a dit que pourquoi le Premier ministre n'agit pas, pourquoi le gouvernement fédéral est toujours dans un débat de la juridiction au lieu de donner ou livrer l'aide aux municipalités qui en ont besoin, de donner les ressources à la région capitale, la région nationale. Et c'est exactement pourquoi on continue de dire au gouvernement, au Premier ministre d'agir avec l'urgence nécessaire pour régler cette crise.
Okay, the next question that we have is from Émilie Bergeron from La Presse canadienne.
Oui, bonjour. Encore sur le même sujet. Bon, vous venez de dire, oui, on est prêt à voter pour s'il y a un vote au Parlement pour le recours à la loi sur les mesures d'urgence, mais on dirait que vous êtes aussi en train de dire que on aurait pu éviter d'en arriver là. Alors vous, si vous aviez été Premier ministre, qu'est-ce que vous auriez fait différemment pour qu'on évite d'avoir recours à la loi sur les mesures d'urgence?
Ce que j'aurais fait, premièrement, journée 1, c'était clair le but de ce convoi. Ils ont partagé leur but ouvertement sur leur site web. C'était clair, le but, c'était renverser le gouvernement. Donc, journée 1, comme Premier ministre, j'aurais fait le travail nécessaire pour arrêter ce convoi, pour parler avec la ville d'Ottawa, pour donner les ressources nécessaires. J'aurais rencontré les maires des municipalités tout de suite pour offrir l'aide nécessaire. On est maintenant dans presque la 3e semaine de la siège à Ottawa et encore la ville d'Ottawa dit qu'on n'a pas reçu l'aide nécessaire, l'aide qu'on a demandée du gouvernement fédéral. Presque la 3e semaine et toujours ils n'ont pas reçu l'aide. Donc, dans mon avis, le Premier ministre d'un pays doit régler une crise dans la capitale du pays tout de suite. Donc, ça, c'est la journée 1. Deuxièmement, j'ai dit que c'est clair qu'il y a le financement étranger qui aide cette convoi. Et j'ai dit qu'on doit faire enquête sur ces fonds, parler avec les homologues aux États-Unis pour arrêter ces fonds, parce que c'est clair aussi, il y a de l'interférence étrangère des États-Unis qui aide ce convoi. Aussi, j'ai dit qu'on a besoin d'un plan. Et les Canadiens et Canadiens ont besoin d'un plan. Ils méritent d'avoir un plan. Et ce plan doit dire clairement qu'on va investir dans nos soins de santé pour qu'on puisse arrêter le péril qu'on a vu à plusieurs reprises que notre système de santé était en péril de s'effondrer. Et finalement, il y a des autres frustrations que les gens ont qui étaient là avant de la pandémie. J'aurais fait le travail nécessaire pour répondre aux ces inquiétudes, ces frustrations, comme le fait qu'on ne peut pas trouver de logement abordable, le fait qu'on a un coût de la vie qui augmente. Tout ça aide à la frustration en général dans le pays. Mais agir maintenant tout de suite répondre aux besoins des municipalités, pas politiser ce convoi, comme on a vu avec les conservateurs et les libéraux. Les deux ont joué des politiques, on dit que c'est une occasion de gain des points. Ce n'est pas ça. Tout le temps, on doit dire que la question de vaccination, la question de santé, c'est une question de la science, pas une question de politique, pas une question de partisanship, je dois dire. Ce n'est pas une question partisane, c'est une question de science. On doit aider nos travailleurs de première ligne, nos travailleurs de santé et investir dans notre santé pour qu'on puisse sortir de la pandémie. Et ça veut dire prendre des décisions pour éliminer les restrictions basées sur la preuve, basée sur la science, basée sur la santé publique, pas basée sur les demandes d'un convoi qui veut renverser le gouvernement.
Et justement, pour revenir sur une chose que vous avez dite là, en déclaration d'ouverture, vous avez dit que les premiers ministres ne doivent pas, en quelque sorte, céder à des gens fâchés. Est-ce que, donc, selon vous, si je comprends bien, toute annonce là, de possible plan de réouverture, ce n'est pas basé sur la science, selon ce que vous dites, et donc, ça équivaut là, à répondre, à céder. Est-ce que c'est ça que vous voulez dire?
Mon inquiétude, c'est le fait qu'on a des premiers ministres à travers le pays, comme le premier ministre en Ontario et en Saskatchewan et en Alberta, ils prennent des décisions à cause des gens fâchés au lieu de prendre des décisions basées sur le conseil des santé publiques, des experts. Donc, oui, c'est clair qu'on va avoir un temps où on doit enlever les restrictions, les mandats, c'est clair. On va avoir un temps comme ça. Et pour arriver à ce temps, on doit avoir un plan. Et un plan basé sur la science, pas basé sur les gens qui sont fâchés, qui crient dans les rues. On doit baser cette décision sur la science, sur les médecins, sur les gens qui ont étudié, évalué les risques. Et ce que je plaide, c'est le fait que si on a des premiers ministres qui prennent des décisions basées sur les gens qui sont fâchés, ça a un risque de créer une érosion de la confiance dans notre institution et les décisions prises par le gouvernement. Et ça, c'est une grande menace. Et on ne veut jamais que quelque chose comme ça se reproduise. Donc, c'est pourquoi je dis qu'on ne doit pas répondre aux gens fâchés comme ça, le convoi, mais on doit répondre à la frustration des gens à travers les pays qui ont suivi les conseils de santé publique, qui étaient vaccinés. Et ce plan doit être basé sur la science pour comment on peut sortir de la pandémie. Et ça va inclure une élimination des restrictions pour l'avenir. Et j'appuie ça, mais basé sur la science, basé sur les experts, basé sur les conseils des experts, pas basé sur les gens qui créent un siège à la capitale.
The next question is from Alex Ballingall of the Toronto Star.
Hey, good morning. On the Emergencies Act, so I understand if my French comprehension is still up to par. You support it. You support the invocation of the Emergencies Act, but I want to know what exactly you would like to see the federal government do with the powers given to it under that act. What specifically should the government do with the Emergencies Act?
Well, first off, I want to say the fact that the Prime Minister is resorting to this measure is proof of a failure of leadership. The reason why we got to this point is because the Prime Minister let the siege in Ottawa go on for weeks and weeks without actually doing anything about it, allowed the convoy to shut down borders without responding appropriately. And in doing so, has allowed the convoy to dig in, to get entrenched, to allow them to spread across the country. And in doing so, it's also created a ongoing problem for our healthcare workers because they have been harassed, they've been intimidated. We know that each time a convoy goes to a city, the security personnel, police advise healthcare workers, don't wear anything that identifies you as a healthcare worker. Don't wear scrubs or clothing that could identify as you a healthcare worker. How is that possible 2 years into a pandemic that our healthcare workers have to be afraid of visibly disclosing who they are? Like, how did we get to that point? And so I'm saying clearly that the fact that the Prime Minister ignored this problem, let it become a game between the Conservatives and the Liberals, who's going to score points off of it. Well, both of them lost points because they made this into a game instead of making it about the people. And the people this should be about is people like Michael. And Michael Gerlin and his colleagues is what this should be about. How do we protect our healthcare workers? How do we acknowledge their sacrifice and treat them with respect and dignity? Make sure that they're properly funded. That's what this should have been about. And that should have happened on day one. We should have been properly funding our healthcare system. Every time there's a crisis, we heard from healthcare workers, our healthcare system is about to collapse. Where was the federal government to properly fund it, to hire nurses, to support the existing nurses? Where was the emergency then? And then we get to this point where the convoy rolls in, and they've been entrenched in the capital city for weeks. And only after we demanded an emergency debate did the Prime Minister finally start to show some leadership. But why is it taking weeks and weeks of inaction before the government acts? And so what we want to see from the decisions taken by the federal government, if the Emergency Act is brought forward in Parliament, we would support it. But we want to see the outcome being that we solve these problems, that we don't have any border lockdowns anymore. Borders cannot be shut down. Truckers that have been vaccinated, that have done their part, shouldn't be blocked from getting back to their loved ones, getting back home. We want to see the siege ended in Ottawa. We want to see investments in our healthcare system. We want to see an immediate emergency operation to invest in healthcare and frontline healthcare workers. And we want to see the tools at the federal level used to respond to this crisis in a way that deals with the crisis. That's what our hope is.
So just springing off that, so if you can be even more specific, I guess, in terms of clearing out the streets in Ottawa, do you want the federal government to somehow play an overseer role or something in trying to get the occupation lifted? Should they consider the military? What exactly under the Emergencies Act do you want them to do under the special powers that are provided in that legislation?
Well, in terms of the way that it's done, that should be in coordination with the experts on the ground that will determine the best way to achieve these outcomes. The Emergencies Act provides a significant number of tools. Let me talk about the outcomes that I want. The implementation of those tools, the way they're used, that will be decisions that are made with the folks that will be experts in the field. That'll include logistics experts, people that are involved in defense, people involved in RCMP. So using the experts who've got the on-the-ground knowledge, they should be the ones consulted in terms of the how. The outcomes that we want, our borders should not be locked down ever again. There should be no lockdown of our borders. We should have truckers be able to travel freely between the borders, and they should not be blocked by a convoy. The Ambassador Bridge, busiest point of trade in North America, should not be blocked the way we saw in Windsor over the past couple of days. That should not happen again. All borders should not be blocked by the convoy. The siege should be lifted in Ottawa. The residents in Ottawa should not be under siege. Our healthcare system needs to be invested in. That should be a part of this. Using the Emergency Act should also free up tools to immediately invest in our healthcare system so that workers like Michael, frontline healthcare workers, frontline nurses, are not burnt out, overworked, stressed out, going through trauma, going through PTSD because they are under-resourced and understaffed. That should not happen. So I want to see the Emergencies Act tools used to help our healthcare system out immediately, because there is an emergency there. And we've heard from healthcare workers. I want to see that happen as well. I also want to see that these tools be used towards the goal of laying out a plan for us to get out of the pandemic, and so the Canadians that have done their part know what that is. And so those are the outcomes that I want, and the exact mechanisms that are used to achieve that, that's going to be worked out with the experts. But I want those outcomes. Those are the outcomes that Canadians expect. We want to be safe. We want to see our borders flow, and we want to make sure our healthcare system is invested in. Those are the outcomes that we need to see.
OK, la prochaine question vient de Mélène Crête avec La Presse.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh. Êtes-vous d'accord avec l'usage de l'armée canadienne pour protéger des infrastructures critiques comme le pont Ambassadeur que vous avez nommé?
Si c'est nécessaire, je suis ouvert. Je ne veux pas voir une escalation des tensions, des violences, mais c'est clair qu'on doit protéger des infrastructures essentielles comme nos ponts, comme les frontières. Et ça, c'est clair, c'est important. Et je suis ouvert aux étapes nécessaires pour protéger nos infrastructures. Et comme j'ai dit, je veux voir des résultats. Avec cette déclaration, si le gouvernement présente ce mesure dans le Parlement, je suis prêt d'appuyer ces mesures, mais je veux voir des résultats. Ça veut dire de s'assurer que nos frontières sont ouvertes, de s'assurer que les gens sont en sécurité à Ottawa et à travers le pays. Et finalement, je pense aussi que c'est nécessaire d'utiliser les mesures au niveau fédéral pour investir dans nos soins de santé, pour aider les provinces et territoires, de s'assurer que nos systèmes de santé est résilient et capable de répondre aux besoins et jamais dans une position de péril de s'effondrer.
Et si je comprends bien vos commentaires plus tôt, vous soupçonnez que les provinces sont en train de lever certaines restrictions sanitaires en réaction aux demandes des manifestants qui sont à Ottawa et dans d'autres villes canadiennes?
C'est ce qu'il me semble. Il me semble que leur décision et le timing de ces décisions, c'est pour plaire ces manifestants. Et c'est la mauvaise chose à faire. On ne doit jamais prendre des décisions sanitaires basées sur la colère des manifestants qui s'opposent à la science. Ça a aucun sens de faire ça. Donc, oui, je suis pour l'élimination des restrictions et des mandats dans l'avenir. C'est clair, on va avoir une élimination des restrictions et des mandats dans l'avenir. Et pour arriver à ce moment, on doit avoir le conseil des experts en santé publique, pas la colère des manifestants qui font des actes horribles dans la capitale, qui bloquent les camionneurs de traverser les frontières, qui causent la perte des emplois, qui intimident et harcèlent les travailleurs de santé. Ce n'est pas ces gens qui doivent avoir aucun impact sur les décisions de santé, aucun impact. Et la décision doit rester dans les mains des experts et on doit prendre les décisions basées sur la science et pour le bien-être des Canadiens et Canadiennes, des Québécois et Québécoises. Ça doit être la priorité.
Next question is from Marie Wolfe with the Canadian Press.
Yes, can I just clarify, following up what one of my colleagues asked, you say you support the invoking the Emergencies Act and you'd like to see the outcome, but can I just be clear about whether you are basically giving them a blank check to do whatever they like? I mean, do you support, for example, the use of military action?
Well, from the beginning, I think that this is an extreme measure and I don't want to see an escalation of tensions. But if the question is about how do we protect our infrastructure, how do we protect our bridges and our borders from the convoy whose goal is to undermine democracy, whose stated goal was to replace elected officials in Parliament with a committee of their choosing, if the question is how do we lift the siege in Ottawa, then I'm open to using the emergency measures to achieve that goal. I don't want to see a trampling of human rights. I don't want to see violence, but I certainly want to see people safe. I certainly want to see people not lose their jobs because we've got the convoy shutting down the borders and people are losing, thousands of workers are losing their jobs. I certainly don't want to see people intimidated and harassed in their own communities. And I want to see people safe. So I want to see the Emergency Act used in a way to achieve the goals of keeping people safe, keeping our borders open, and making sure that our healthcare is invested in.
But can I just be clear, would you support using the military to clear protesters? And are there any concerns? I mean, the Emergencies Act has never before been invoked, and I'm just wondering if you felt the government had exhausted all other options. You spoke about a failure of leadership, and I wondered if you felt that possibly more should have been done beforehand to move these protesters on without invoking this legislation, which, as I said, has never been used before.
And I think your question is really important. There's a gravity of this decision, and I don't take that lightly. I think that the government has failed, and the fact that I think the Prime Minister has specifically failed in leadership for us to be in a point where the Emergency Act is even being discussed, and the question of it being invoked, is being discussed. It's because there's been a failure. We've seen that the federal government and the Prime Minister has not responded in a way necessary to deal with this crisis. He has not done that. And as a result, we've got to this point. And now in this crisis, the situation is pretty serious. When you've got the world looking at Canada and saying, well, maybe they can't control their borders, there is a serious threat that companies look at Canada and say, well, maybe it doesn't make sense for us to have a factory in Canada if the borders can be shut down at any point in time. That could have devastating impacts to people, to workers that may not just lose their jobs now, but what if companies decide not to invest in Canada because they don't trust that our borders can work? We might lose jobs, thousands of jobs in the future as well. If people are seeing decisions being made because of an angry mob instead of decisions being made because of people like Michael, healthcare workers who know what's going on the ground, experts that understand what's going on, if decisions are being made to please or to try to appease angry mobs and not decisions made based on best evidence, then we're in a serious crisis. That will erode public trust. The public needs to know when we make a decision, it's because it's going to help people out. It's going to save lives. It's going to make sure our healthcare system is not overwhelmed. And they need to be able to trust those decisions. All of that is in question now because the Prime Minister has failed to respond to the crisis of this small group of people that have shut down borders and laid siege to a city and harassed and intimidated healthcare workers. That has to end. And so I take that very seriously. And I think that it should never have got to this point. But at this point, we need to act. And we need to make sure that these things are addressed. We've done so in a way that there should always be checks and balances. There should always be clear scrutiny on the type of use of the way that these measures are being used. And we'll continue to provide scrutiny. And we will raise concerns if there's any sort of inappropriate use of these measures. But the outcomes that we want to see are vital. We want to see our borders open. We want to make sure that people are safe in their communities. We want to make sure people aren't losing their jobs. We want to make sure their healthcare system is invested in and given the resources necessary so it is not at the brink of collapse and so that our healthcare workers aren't pushed to the point of collapse as well. And so these are some of the outcomes that I hope to see if the measures are used. And I want to see them used in a way that is in the best interest of Canadians.
Next, we have Ashley Burke from the CBC.
Hi there. I know you talked about this in French at the beginning, but we were just hoping you could cover off in English as well. Is the NDP the partner that will endorse the Prime Minister invoking the Emergencies Act for the first time to deal with these protests across the country?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Will the NDP be the partner in the House to help the government endorse invoking the Emergencies Act? I know you talked about it in French, but could you just tell us that in English as well?
Certainly. So I said in French as well that the fact that we're at this point that the Emergencies Act needs to be invoked or is being discussed, being invoked, is proof of the failure of leadership of the Prime Minister for us to even be in this point. For weeks and weeks, he did not act. That inaction allowed the convoy to dig in, and it has created this problem, not just in Ottawa, but across the country. So that's a proof point of the failure of his leadership. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that with any glee. This is something that hurts all of Canada, the fact that we're in this point. And then if this is brought to the House, I believe that it is, if the Emergency Act is brought to the House, given how serious things are and given how serious the crisis is, we would support it. We've not been in contact about any details, but if the idea is to invoke the Emergency Measures Act to deal with this crisis, to deal with the convoy, and to make sure that Canadians are safe, to make sure our borders are safe, and to make sure our healthcare system is invested in, these are things that we believe must happen. And so we would support that. In terms of the details of this, we will have discussions and work out more details. But we believe that given the failure of leadership and given the crisis that we're in right now, that if that decision came to the House, we would be in support of bringing in those measures to achieve the outcomes that I've outlined.
In the past, your party has voted against invoking the War Measures Act. This is, decades ago, of course. What's changed now?
Well, the War Measures Act is different from what this is. This is the Emergency Act, and it was changed as a result of problems of the War Measures Act. The War Measures Act had severe, had rightly so, had a lot of critiques and a lot of problems given the broad-ranging powers and the potential, and in that case, the abuse of human rights that happened as a result of it. So that was replaced by the Emergencies Act. So the Emergencies Act, though people make the connection that it's flows from that previous act, it is not a War Measures Act. It does not have the same powers, does not have the same scope. It is completely different. But we are in an emergency. It is clear when you've got thousands and thousands of workers that have lost their jobs because a small group of people shut down a border, that is an emergency. When our healthcare system is constantly being put in a state of potential collapse and being overwhelmed, and our healthcare workers are struggling, that is an emergency. When our capital city is under siege and has been under siege for weeks, this is an emergency. And so the use of the tools of the Emergencies Act to be able to provide safety and security to people, to invest in our healthcare system, to protect our borders is something that we would support.
Next question comes from Boris Pourreau avec Le Devoir.
Bonjour, M. Singh. Est-ce que vous venez tout juste de dire que le NPD n'a pas été consulté pour le dépôt de la loi sur les mesures d'urgence? Et parce que c'est dans ma compréhension que le Parlement doit être consulté. Mais est-ce que le NPD ou les autres partis d'opposition ont été consultés?
On n'était pas consultés, mais à ce moment, la mesure n'est pas devant le Parlement. Mais et j'ai dit deux choses aujourd'hui. Un, c'est le fait que le Premier ministre est en train d'invoquer ces mesures. C'est un exemple, c'est preuve de la faillite de ce gouvernement. Un. Et deuxièmement, si ces mesures est présentées dans les chambres de communes, on est prêt d'appuyer. J'ai dit que j'ai des critères et les résultats que je veux voir, et je vais vérifier si ce sont les résultats qu'on va avoir, mais je suis prêt d'appuyer ces mesures dans la Chambre de communes. Après, on a des discussions, et j'ai dit aujourd'hui mon ouverture à appuyer la mesure parce qu'on est dans une crise à ce moment à travers le pays.
Merci de la précision. Ensuite, votre collègue Matthew Green a dit que le maire Jim Watson devrait démissionner, le maire d'Ottawa. J'aimerais savoir si c'est la position du NPD.
Notre position, c'est que M. Watson, le maire d'Ottawa, était une faillite complète. Ses actions, c'était une faillite complète. Une faillite pour la protection des gens, une faillite pour les résidents d'Ottawa. C'est complètement inacceptable qu'une maire d'une ville et le chef de police de la ville ont laissé tout ce qui s'est passé se passer. C'est complètement une faillite. Et son leadership, c'était une faillite. Donc, c'est clair, les gens pensent la même chose. Les gens d'Ottawa pensent qu'il était abandonné. Abandonné par le maire, par la ville et par le gouvernement fédéral aussi. Donc, notre position, c'était une faillite, les décisions qu'il a prises et le fait qu'il a abandonné la population.
The next question is from Rachel Emmanuel with iPolitics.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Thanks for taking our questions. I'm wondering if the NDP are planning to support the Conservatives' motion, which calls on the government to give Canadians a roadmap out of COVID-19 restrictions.
My understanding that is not their motion. Their motion is just to lift all mandates immediately. We don't support that. We support the lifting of restrictions based on public health. We need to. We're going to lift mandates. We're going to lift restrictions. That should be done not because there's an angry mob at the door, but because the public health folks feel that it's safe to do so. And that's what we believe In terms of a plan to get out of the pandemic, I've been calling for that plan since the beginning of the emergency debate and before that we need a plan. Canadians need a plan to get out of the pandemic. And we absolutely believe that the federal government should work with provinces and territories and public health officials to develop this plan and then present it to Canadians. Canadians need to know. They are frustrated. They are angry. I'm talking about the broader population, not the convoy, but Canadians are angry because it's been a tough time and they need to know what the plan is to get out of it. And that's something we absolutely support. But with the respect to the Conservative motion, my understanding, the motion that's up for vote is a motion to just lift all mandates immediately. And I think that is caving to the demands of this convoy, and we are absolutely opposed to that.
Sure. And then, as you mentioned, you've been calling for a plan. You've been calling for the government to implement a plan out of COVID-19 restrictions. Would you consider pressuring the government to table such a plan in return for supporting them on implementing the Emergencies Act?
Well, we want this plan, and we want this plan right away. And we know that this plan is going to take working with public health and working with provinces and territories, but Canadians need to know what that plan is. So we're going to continue to push for that plan. And with respect to the Emergencies Act, I've expressed today that I'm open to supporting it. We've got some criteria, some results that I want to see happen. I want to see that the Emergency Act is used to achieve these goals of making sure people are safe, making sure our borders are safe, making sure our healthcare system is invested in, and making sure that siege is lifted in Ottawa. These are some of the criteria or these are the results that I want to see achieved by the Emergency Act, but I'm expressing an openness to supporting it.
I'm not seeing any more questions at this time, so I'll turn it back to you, Jagmeet, for some final remarks.
Thanks so much. I want to thank Michael Garland for being here, and the power of your words, Michael. It touched me, and I know for thousands of Canadians out there, frontline healthcare workers, they heard your story and said, that's me too. That's what I've gone through. That's what my colleagues have gone through. That's what my friends and family have gone through. And so I want to thank you for sharing that. That was very important, very powerful, and a reminder for people who we're standing with, who we're fighting for. We're standing with Michael. We're standing with the frontline healthcare workers. We're standing with workers. We're standing with truckers who have been doing their job throughout the pandemic, who've gotten vaccinated, or bringing goods in from into the country. We're standing with Canadians who have done everything that they can and want to know what the plan is to get out of this. We are with you, and we're going to fight to make sure our healthcare system is properly funded, that our healthcare workers are properly supported, and that Canadians have a plan to get out of this pandemic, and we can do that. I'm confident we can do it, and that's what we're going to fight for. Thanks so much, Michael. Thank you. Merci.
Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. This concludes our press conference. Thank you.